In the previous video, we explained that a percentage is just a number, and that we work out a percentage by dividing one number by another and times it by 100. Often, though, we want to be able to convert percentages back to a decimal or a fraction. Numerically, they're often easier to work with this way, particularly when using a calculator. So we know that 50%, for example, means 50 out of 100. 25% means 25 out of 100. As a fraction, this is 50 over 100. And this is the same for any other percentage. If it's 79%, it's 79 over 100. If it's 81%, it's 81 over 100. This is quite easy to convert to a decimal. We just do the division. 50 divided by 100 is equal to 0.5. You should be very easily able to divide numbers by 100. There is a video that explains this in the number section. This works for any percentages we've just said. So let's take 32%. 32% is 32 over 100. And if this question was just write 32% as a fraction, there you've already done it. We can make that into a much simpler fraction, of course, by reducing it to its simplest terms. Again, if you look in the fractions section, there's a video on looking at how to do this. But 32 over 100 is the same as 8 over 25. And then we want to look at how to convert it to a decimal. Well, just do the division. 32 divided by 100 is equal to 0.32. We've just moved the decimal place 2 places to the left. That's very simple and straightforward, converting from a percentage into a decimal number or from a percentage into a fraction. It is important that you're able to do this quickly and without fuss. So if you're having any problems in understanding this, run back over this part of the video again and again until you do see exactly what's happening. It is very simple, very straightforward. There are no tricks here. It's always useful to be able to do this as quickly as you possibly can. So it's good to remember some of the common percentages and what their fractional values are. So 10%, for example, is 1 over 10. It's 10 over 100, isn't it really? But we make that into its simplest terms and make it 1 over 10. It's also then very easy to turn into its decimal value of 0.1. The next common one we're going to look at is 25%. 25% is 25 over 100. That's the fraction. We could reduce that down, if we want to 1 over 4, because there are 4 25s in 100. And so the highest common multiple of those two numbers is 25. So that gives us our fraction of 1 over 4. And then 1 over 4, if we want to put that as a decimal number, 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. The most straightforward one, and the one that you really must remember, is 50%. 50% is 50 over 100. 50 over 100, well, you should be able to work out very quickly that that's the same as 1 over 2. And 1 over 2 as a decimal number is 0.5. So 50%, a half, and 0.5 are all the same thing. 75% is 75 over 100, and we can convert that to a fraction of 3 over 4. And if you look at this, 75% is 3 lots of 25%, which is 3/4. 3/4, 3 divided by 4 gives us 0.75. At the very minimum, you need to try and memorize these values. They will help you in an incredible way when you're working out percentages. I suggest you also go away and look at, for example, 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 5%, and see what you get for those values when you convert them into fractions first of all, and then into decimals. You also need to be able to convert the other way around, and so remembering that table is going to help you do that, but also there are arithmetic ways of doing it which are quite simple and straightforward. So as an example, what is 7 out of 20 as a percentage? Well, there are two ways to do this. First way is in your head. Okay, we need to make the bottom number into 100 because that's what percentages means. To get from 20 to 100, we've got to multiply by 5. So to keep the fraction the same, we've got to do the same to the top number as well. Got to multiply the top number by 5. So that would change 7 over 20 into 35 over 100. 35 over 100, very, very simple then, is 35%. Second way, use a calculator to do 100 times 7 divided by 20. And again, that would give you 35%. At this stage, it's perhaps useful to give a brief warning about calculators. Calculators do have a percentage button on them. I think unless you are very, very sure about how that percentage button works on your calculator, you should avoid using it at all. It isn't that necessary. It doesn't actually do a lot of work for you and can create a lot of confusion and end up with you getting the wrong results very, very easily. Stick to the methods we're showing here, doing it with all the numbers involved, and then just adding the percentage sign on to the answer that you get. That way you're less likely to make silly calculator errors and end up with the wrong answer.